You can't buy the soul of a nation, but you can buy its future. Jakob Fugger, a man whose name echoes through the centuries like the faint, haunting notes of a forgotten song, was no mere banker. He was the architect of power in an age where money was still a whispered secret, a force not yet understood but wielded with terrifying precision. His rise was not the result of brute strength or military conquest. It was the result of something more insidious, it's more profound, the manipulation of a world still at the mercy of its own ignorance. Fugger didn't rule with an iron fist. He ruled with the golden hand of finance, shaping the very fabric of European politics, economies, and destinies. So powerful was his influence that, at his peak, he was more powerful than kings, more influential than emperors. But behind the wealth, behind the power, lay a man whose ambition would alter the course of history forever. Jakob Fugger's life story is one that begins in the shadows. He was born in 1459. In a world where the foundations of European society were still being carved out, a time when the feudal system was being slowly replaced by the rise of commerce and trade, Fugger was not born into a royal family. He wasn't the son of an aristocrat or a noble warrior. He was born into a family of modest merchants in the city of Augsburg, Germany, a place where old world traditions met the new world of money and enterprise. It was a city that saw both the power of the church and the creeping influence of a rising middle class. But for young Jakob, the world around him was an unfathomable labyrinth. The idea that someone like him, someone from a humble background, could reshape Europe was almost laughable. But Jakob Fugger was not one to accept limitations. His ambition wasn't just about wealth. It was about control. And he knew better than most that money is the true source of power. By the time Jakob entered his early 20s, Europe was entering a period of immense transformation. The Renaissance was in full bloom. Ideas were flowing as freely as gold. And the church's grip on power, though still firm, was being challenged. The kingdoms of Spain, France, and England were beginning to consolidate their power, but behind the scenes, there was something more insidious at play: an economic revolution that would change the course of history. Fugger, with the eye of a hawk, saw what others missed. The future was not in military conquests or royal bloodlines. It was in the vaults of the world's wealth, in the treasuries of kings, in the gold that could turn a man into a god or a devil. Fugger's rise was not instant. It was a slow, strategic climb, built on the foundation of a family business that had already started to grow under his father, Hans Fugger. Jakob's genius lay in his understanding of what was at stake. The Fugger family began in textiles, but Jakob saw the larger picture. The raw material of wealth wasn't just wool or silk, it was the credit that moved the world. It was the ability to offer loans to kings, to empires, to armies, to the church. It was about knowing when to offer the money and when to pull it back. Jakob Fugger did not just deal in commodities. He dealt in futures. He understood that control over the purse strings of power meant control over the world itself. His first breakthrough came in 1487, when he secured a loan with the Austrian Archduke Sigismund, an early and fateful alliance that set the stage for what would come next. Jakob provided the money to the Archduke in exchange for the right to mine silver and copper in the Tyrol region, an area rich in natural resources. It was a deal that would begin to unravel Europe's old balance of power. As Fugger's wealth grew, so did his influence. He began to expand his empire, taking on larger loans, involving himself in the financing of wars, and inserting himself into the very core of Europe's power structures. By the time he was in his 40s, he was not just a banker, he was a kingmaker. A puppeteer in the shadows of European politics, but Jakob Fugger was not content with merely playing the game. He wanted to control the game, and that's where his true genius lay. He was one of the first to understand the true power of monopolies. He cornered the markets in everything from textiles to gold. But his true stroke of brilliance came with the discovery of a new commodity: silver. He began financing massive mining operations across Europe, particularly in Spain and the Americas. His silver was the lifeblood of European empires, and with every coin that was minted, every ounce of silver that poured from the mines, Jakob Fugger's influence expanded. In 1519, Jakob's empire reached its zenith when he lent vast sums of money to the Holy Roman Emperor, Charles V, in exchange for influence over imperial policies. Fugger was more than a financier. He was a puppet master, pulling the strings of an empire, guiding its destiny with the currency he controlled. His loans were not just transactions, they were tools of influence, methods of manipulating entire governments. It was said that Charles V could not make a decision without consulting Fugger first. And at the height of his power, Jakob Fugger was the wealthiest man in Europe, his fortune outstripping that of any monarch. Some say that at his peak, Fugger was worth more than $400 billion in today's terms, an amount of money so staggering that it was incomprehensible to even the richest of kings. But with power came fear, and with fear came suspicion. The people of Europe began to realize that Fugger was not just a banker, he was a force. His name became synonymous with control. The church feared him. Kings feared him. Even the common folk, who had no real understanding of the financial world, began to see the way his money swayed decisions. Fugger was no longer a mere financier. He was the embodiment of the invisible hand of power. It was no longer just about wealth. It was about sovereignty. It was about shaping the future of nations, and yet, as powerful as he was, Jakob Fugger was not invincible. No man, no empire, can maintain power forever. Despite his strategic brilliance, Fugger's influence began to wane in the 1520s. When the cost of financing Charles V's wars combined with the economic instability of the time began to strain his empire. The very empire that Jakob had helped to build was now beginning to collapse under the weight of its own debts. Wars ravaged Europe. The New World, once a source of endless riches, could no longer sustain the empire Fugger had created. The market for silver and other commodities began to fluctuate. Fugger's once uncheckable position started to erode. Even his vast network of influence began to show cracks. By the time Fugger died in 1525, the world had changed. His empire, built on the back of loans and silver, was no longer the indomitable force it once had been. His family lost much of their wealth and influence, though Jakob's legacy would endure. His descendants would continue to hold sway in the world of finance. But the story of Jakob Fugger, the man who had been more powerful than kings, began to fade into the mists of time. But as we look back on Jakob Fugger's life, what do we see? What lessons can we learn from a man whose wealth and influence once dwarfed those of monarchs and emperors? Fugger understood something that most people still fail to grasp. Money is not just a tool, it is power itself. And in a world where power is often invisible, where the true sources of control lie hidden beneath layers of bureaucracy and diplomacy, Jakob Fugger's story is a reminder of the thin line between success and failure. He proved that in the right hands, wealth can reshape the world. But he also showed that wealth, once it is amassed, can be a curse as much as it is a blessing. The legacy of Jakob Fugger is not just one of financial genius. It is a reflection of the complexities of power, how it is acquired, how it is wielded, and how it can be lost. Fugger's life was a lesson in ambition and its consequences. He rose higher than any man before him. But in the end, the forces of history, the instability of markets, and the fragility of human endeavor brought him low. And as we sit here, in the 21st century, gazing at the great financial empires that dominate our world, we must ask ourselves, what has really changed? The names may have shifted, Fugger is gone, but his successors still influence the world's great institutions. But the game is still the same. Money is still the invisible hand, shaping governments, dictating wars, and controlling lives. The question remains, who is controlling the strings now? And how long until the next empire of wealth begins to crumble under the weight of its own ambition? Jakob Fugger's story is not just one of a man who became more powerful than kings. It is the story of how money, in the right hands, can change the course of history. But it is also a reminder that no one, no matter how powerful, can escape the unyielding forces of fate. And perhaps that, above all, is the greatest lesson of all.